Hi guys. In the last episode, pain found its voice. Not through screams. Not through rebellion. But through silence, numbness, and unanswered questions. One brother carried his pain into the world. The other was left behind. Still hungry. Still unheard. Still enduring. So in this final feature, we are bringing you episodes 3, 4, and 5, together. As one uninterrupted chapter. Not because the story is shorter, but because the truth is heavier when it is told without pause. What you are about to watch is the full descent. From influence, to belief, to consequence. If you pause, come back because this story does not repeat itself. Hunger is not just the absence of food. Hunger is the absence of meaning. When hunger lasts long enough, it begins to search. And when it searches, it listens. The elder twin did not go looking for trouble. He did not seek rebellion. He did not crave power. What he wanted, without realizing it, was explanation. An explanation has a way of arriving disguised as understanding. It began quietly. Faces he noticed more often. Young men who seemed to exist on the edges of campus life. They were not loud. They did not compete for attention. They did not rush to lectures or laugh carelessly. They stood back. Watched. Observed. They spoke less than others, but when they spoke, people listened. They noticed him early. A boy who walked alone. A boy who skipped lectures but never looked careless. A boy whose eyes carried weight. Pain has a way of making people visible, to the wrong kind of eyes. One evening, as the elder twins sat outside the hostel, lost in thought, one of them spoke. Not aggressively. Not rudely. Casually. "You're quiet." It was not a question. The elder twin looked up but did not respond. The boy smiled slightly. "Quiet people see more." That sentence landed softly. Too softly. It felt familiar. It felt true. They did not interrogate him. They did not ask about his family or his past. They did not offer advice. They simply stayed nearby. Talking among themselves. About life. About struggle. About how the world truly works beneath the surface. They spoke of poverty not as a misfortune, but as a system. They spoke of suffering not as accident, but as design. They spoke of patience as a lie sold to the powerless to keep them obedient. The elder twin listened. Listening was something he had learned long ago. Listening had once kept him alive. Back at the house, the younger twin's numbness deepened. Days blurred together. He woke, worked, endured. Hunger arrived like a scheduled visitor. Insults followed without warning. Fear became predictable. Predictability, he learned, hurt less than hope. Hope required disappointment. Numbness required nothing. At school, teachers noticed he was present but absent. At home, no one noticed anything at all. Silence had finished its work. On campus, the conversations continued. Never direct. Never forceful. Always framed as observations. Some people suffer because they are meant to. Some systems only change when something valuable is taken. Some people only understand loss. These statements were never argued. They were offered. And the elder twin felt something unfamiliar, not agreement, but recognition. These boys spoke the thoughts he had been afraid to admit. They did not call it anger. They called it awareness. One night, someone said, "You think too much. That's not weakness." Another added quietly. Pain sharpens some people. The elder twin did not smile. But he did not leave. He began spending more time near them. Not openly. Not every day. Just enough. They never pressured him. Never demanded loyalty. Never mentioned consequences. Influence works best when it feels like choice. Meanwhile, the younger twin stopped expecting anything. He stopped hoping for food before hunger. Stopped hoping for peace before night. Stopped hoping altogether. When he thought of his brother, he no longer imagined rescue. He imagined distance. And distance, too, can feel like abandonment. On campus, the elder twin began skipping lectures more frequently. Not because he no longer cared, but because his thoughts had found direction. He realized something unsettling. The world did not reward endurance. It rewarded impact. Silence changed nothing. Patience corrected nothing. One night, as the group stood together under dim lights, someone asked a careful question. What would make all that pain mean something? The elder twin did not answer immediately. The silence stretched, not awkward, but expectant. He thought of locked doors. Empty plates. A child standing quietly while adults ate. I don't know, he said finally. The boy nodded. That's honest. Another voice added, meaning doesn't come by itself. It's made. Back at the house, the younger twin sat alone in his room. He did not cry. He did not pray. He did not call. Something inside him had gone quiet. Quiet things break differently. The elder twin began to notice something frightening. The anger he once feared now felt controlled. Focused. Reasonable. That scared him more than rage ever could. Because it felt justified. He began telling himself stories. Stories where suffering had purpose. Stories where fairness required balance. Stories where loss was the only language some people understood. These were not plans. Not yet. But they were no longer harmless thoughts. Influence does not need violence to begin. It only needs agreement. One evening, as they sat together, one of the boys said, "People call it evil when the powerless stop obeying." No one argued. The elder twin said nothing. But his silence was no longer empty. Back at the house, the younger twin lay awake, listening, not to sounds, but to nothing. And that was when the elder twin realized something terrifying. He was no longer afraid of his thoughts. He was afraid of losing them. Because they explained too much. Pain and influence standing in the same room. Hunger listening carefully. A mind beginning to believe that meaning might come at a cost. At first, the elder twin tried to resist that idea. Not because it was wrong, but because accepting it felt dangerous. Because once the meaning has a price, someone must pay it. And for a long time, he had believed payment was optional. Now he wasn't so sure. The conversations changed subtly. No longer broad observations about the world. No longer distant theories about suffering and power. They became personal. Specific. Quietly directed. Someone would ask, "How long has your brother been hungry?" Another would say, "Some people mistake endurance for virtue." No one raised their voice. No one demanded answers. But the questions stayed long after the night ended. Silence, he realized, had always cost something. It had cost meals. It had cost childhood. It had cost protection. It had cost his brother's voice. Silence had never been free. It had simply been paid by the weakest person in the room. Back at the house, the younger twin felt the weight of that silence pressing inward. He no longer complained because complaint required belief. Belief that someone would listen. Belief that someone would act. He had lost both. His body moved automatically now. Wake. Work. Endure. Sleep. Hunger no longer surprised him. Pain no longer frightened him. This was what life was. And that acceptance, that quiet surrender, was the most dangerous thing of all. On campus, the elder twin began to notice how easily people ignored suffering once it became familiar. He watched classmates scroll past images of violence, tragedy, poverty, with brief expressions of sympathy before returning to laughter. He realized something deeply unsettling: awareness without consequence is just another form of silence. He remembered all the adults who had seen him hungry and said nothing. All the teachers who had noticed bruises and asked no questions. All the relatives who knew the truth and chose peace over intervention. Silence had not been ignorance. It had been a decision. And decisions, he was beginning to understand, have prices. The boys he now spent time with never spoke of guilt. They spoke of balance. Of correction. Of the idea that systems survive because someone always pays quietly. They never told him what to do. They simply asked what he believed. And belief, once spoken, begins to demand consistency. One night, alone in his room, the elder twin tried to remember the last time he felt innocent. He could not. Innocence required protection. He had never had that. What he had instead was responsibility placed on a child who had never asked for it. He thought of his brother again. Smaller now. Quieter. Less visible. He imagined him growing older inside that same house. Learning the same lessons. Becoming the same kind of silent. The thought made his chest tighten. Was silence protecting anyone? Or was it simply preserving the comfort of those who caused the pain? The question would not leave him. Meanwhile, the younger twin began to internalize a dangerous belief of his own, that suffering was permanent. That escape was impossible. That the world had already decided his value. When pain lasts long enough, it stops asking for meaning. It just exists. And that existence becomes a prison. On campus, the elder twin stopped arguing with his thoughts. He stopped correcting them. He stopped pretending they were temporary. He began arranging them. Organizing them. Turning them over slowly, examining every angle. If silence had a price. If endurance had a cost. If patience only prolonged suffering. Then what was action worth? He did not think in terms of revenge. That felt too emotional. Too chaotic. He thought in terms of consequence. Balance. Exchange. He told himself he wasn't angry. And that was true. Anger burns quickly. What he felt was colder. Heavier. More stable. Belief had settled in. Back at the house, the younger twin fell ill one night. Not dramatically. Not urgently. Just quietly. Hunger does that. It weakens slowly. He lay on his bed, listening to voices in the house that did not include him. Plates clinked. Laughter surfaced. Life continued. And no one noticed. That was when the elder twin finally understood the full cost of silence. It does not scream. It does not threaten. It simply removes people piece by piece until there is no one left to protect. The next time he sat with the group, no one spoke at first. They did not need to. They had been watching him. Waiting. Belief announces itself through stillness. Someone finally said, "You've changed." It was not an accusation. It was an observation. He did not deny it. Another voice followed, calm and deliberate. Change means you're listening. Listening. That word again. Listening had once kept him alive. Now it was teaching him something else. That the world does not reward suffering. It responds to disruption. He walked back to his room that night with a clarity that frightened him. Not because it was dark. But because it felt logical. He told himself he still had time. That nothing was decided. That thoughts were not actions. But deep down, he knew something irreversible had happened. He had crossed from questioning into justification. Back at the house, the younger twin stared at the ceiling, feeling smaller than ever. He did not know his brother was changing. He did not know influence had entered the space between them. He only knew that hunger was constant, and silence was safer than hope. Pain does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates. It gathers quietly, layer by layer, moment by moment, unanswered question by unanswered question. And when it has waited long enough, when it has been ignored long enough, it stops asking for relief. It begins to demand. By the time the elder twin understood this, the question was no longer whether something would happen. That question had already passed. The only question left was how much would be taken, and who would be forced to pay. He no longer argued with himself. Argument belonged to doubt, and doubt had been worn down by years of endurance. What remained was a kind of certainty that did not feel explosive or reckless. It felt heavy. Cold. Stable. The kind of certainty that settles in the bones and refuses to move. He told himself he was calm. And that frightened him more than anger ever had. The boys he now spent time with no longer spoke in riddles. They did not push him. They did not instruct him openly. They simply spoke as if certain conclusions were obvious. As if the world worked a particular way, and anyone who paid attention long enough would eventually see it. They spoke about systems that survive because someone always suffers quietly. They spoke about households that function because children learn early not to speak. They spoke about how cruelty hides best behind normality. And they spoke about silence. Silence, they said, was never neutral. Silence always chose a side. Back at the house, the younger twin's body continued to shrink. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would alarm strangers. Just enough to be noticed by those who looked closely. His clothes hung looser now. His movements were slower. His voice, when he used it at all, was flat and distant. He no longer expected food before hunger. He no longer expected peace before night. He no longer expected anything. Expectation, he had learned, was a form of self-harm. At school, teachers spoke around him rather than to him. At home, adults spoke over him rather than with him. He had become something easier than a child. He had become furniture. On campus, the elder twin noticed how easily people moved through their lives without noticing the cost of that movement. He watched classmates complain about inconveniences with the casual confidence of people who had never wondered where their next meal would come from. He listened to laughter that did not carry fear underneath it. And for the first time, that difference felt obscene. He realized something that unsettled him deeply. Suffering does not shock people unless it interrupts comfort. If it remains contained, hidden, predictable, it becomes background noise. That realization hardened something inside him. He began to tell himself stories, not dramatic ones, not emotional ones. Practical ones. Stories where suffering had meaning because it forced reckoning. Stories where balance mattered more than intention. Stories where consequences were the only language some people understood. He told himself this was not about revenge. Revenge was emotional. Reckless. Personal. This, he believed, was structural. Back at the house, the younger twin fell sick again. Nothing serious enough to summon concern. Hunger rarely announces itself loudly. It weakens quietly. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to voices move through the house without stopping for him. He did not call his brother. He did not want to be a reminder. That silence cut deeper than any insult ever had. Miles away, the elder twin felt it. Not as a message. Not as a warning. As a pressure. A tightening that refused to loosen. He found himself replaying images uninvited, a locked door. An empty plate. A child standing quietly while adults ate. He noticed something frightening. These images no longer caused pain. They caused resolve. The night he returned to that house did not feel dramatic. There was no music swelling in his chest. No shaking hands. No racing heart. He felt composed. Focused. Almost detached. That was when he should have been afraid. The house looked the same. Ordinary. Harmless. That ordinariness felt like an accusation. Years of suffering hidden behind routine walls. Years of cruelty disguised as discipline. Years of hunger masked as responsibility. Nothing in that house looked like a crime. And yet everything in it had been won. He noticed the younger twin first. Smaller than he remembered. Quieter. Something inside him clenched, but he did not let it show. Showing emotion now felt dangerous. Emotion blurred judgment. This was not a night for blurred judgment. He told himself he was not there to destroy. He was there to correct. To force acknowledgement. To end a cycle that silence had allowed to continue. He told himself that some debts are not paid with apologies. They are paid with loss. The moment itself did not arrive with chaos. It arrived with stillness. With time slowing enough to be felt. With a choice finally standing still long enough to be recognized as a choice. This is the part people misunderstand. The most dangerous decisions do not feel dangerous when they are made. They feel necessary. They feel overdue. They feel justified by the weight of everything that came before. What followed was not heroic. It was not cinematic. It was heavy. Irreversible. A crossing that does not allow return. And when it was done, the silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of neglect. It was the silence of aftermath. The younger twin did not celebrate. There was no relief. No sense of victory. What he felt instead was a hollow coldness that settled deep in his chest. He realized, too late, that pain does not disappear when it is answered. It mutates. The house that had ignored them for years now filled with noise. Neighbors gathered. Voices rose. Questions surfaced. Authorities arrived. The story that had been hidden behind routine began to collapse under scrutiny. And then the truth emerged. Not as a whisper. As a revelation. The woman they had called mother was not their mother. The man they had called father was not their father. They were the sons of the woman who had left. The sister who had traveled abroad. The children she had never returned for. The cruelty had never been correction. It had been resentment. The abuse had never been discipline. It had been displacement. All the anger meant for a missing woman had been poured into two defenseless boys. Suddenly, everything made sense. And suddenly, it was too late. The narrative shifted overnight. People who had been invisible were now visible. Pity arrived. Sympathy arrived. Regret arrived. But none of it arrived in time. The elder twin was no longer seen as a student. No longer seen as a victim. No longer seen as a boy shaped by neglect. He was seen as a decision. And decisions carry consequences that understanding cannot erase. As investigations unfolded, as facts replaced assumptions, the weight of what had happened settled fully. Not as righteousness. Not as justification. As permanence. Nothing could undo it. The younger twin sat alone, listening to voices now filled with concern. He heard people say, "If only we had known." He heard people say, "We never imagined." He realized something bitter and simple. They had known enough. They had imagined enough. They had simply chosen comfort over intervention. Silence had protected the wrong people for too long. The elder twin understood this too. He understood that while pain explains behavior, it does not excuse outcome. That understanding injustice does not grant immunity from judgment. That intention does not outweigh impact. What he had done would not heal his brother. It would not restore childhood. It would not erase hunger. It had only proven one final truth. Pain does not demand justice. It demands payment. And payment is always collected from everyone involved. In the end, there were no winners. Only survivors. And even that word felt fragile. This is not a story about monsters. It is a story about neglect. About silence. About what happens when suffering is ignored long enough to believe it must speak for itself. If this story unsettles you, it should. Because stories like this do not begin with violence. They begin with hunger. With silence. With people choosing not to see. This is Crystal Chronicles, and this is the end of the story.